Okay. All right. Welcome everybody, and hope you're having a wonderful evening. This is Parshat Shemini 5781. It is tonight happens to be beginning of Yom HaShoah, and although for a number of reasons that probably deserve a whole class, I don't really commemorate this particular day today. I One of the reasons is because Chazal established a day of mourning for all Jewish tragedies, and that's Tisha B'Av, and that includes the Shoah, and includes the Crusades, and includes the expulsions, et cetera, et cetera. And so I not that I prefer to really commemorate this ever, but when I do commemorate it, it will be on Tisha B'Av, which is much more meaningful for me. Um, but for those of you who are commemorating it, let's maybe, nevertheless, we can definitely learn Ilu Nishmot, the Kedushim who perished in the Shoah, and the Neshamot, the Neshamot should rise even higher, if that's even possible, as high as they already are, with the words of Torah that we'll share tonight. The Parsha. Uh, People like a quick summary, a little nutshell version of the parsha before we begin the actual class and deep dive into the actual verses. So, a quick general summary of the parsha is this: we're on the 8th day of Nisan, and no, sorry, the first day of Nisan, the 8th day of the inauguration of the Mishkan. We built the Mishkan in the end of Shemot, and Hashem's presence appeared to the Jewish people, and then the Kohanim had to be taught about their korbanot, and that was the beginning of the Ikra. And then immediately afterwards, the Mishkan is completed, the Kohanim are inaugurated, and the two sons of Aharon, Nadav and Avihu, they brought what turns out to be an alien fire. That's what the Torah calls it. What that means exactly is up to a number of possibilities. We'll talk about several during the class, but nevertheless, whatever they brought was definitely unfavorable, and Hashem killed them. They died, and very miraculously, very unnaturally, let's call it that way. And as a result, the other Kohanim, the remaining 3 Kohanim, that's Aaron and his 2 remaining sons, they became more or less what are called mourners, in the status of aninut, of being an onen. So at that point, certain halachot popped in that the Torah begins to teach us about. It also teaches us about the halachot of drinking. We'll hopefully discuss this a little bit, but the Kohanim are forbidden to drink wine for sure, maybe other spirits if it causes them any kind of lightheadedness or anything like that. They're not allowed to drink that before they perform their avodah, and because of that, there are actually halachic ramifications for us. That's one of the reasons why we say, why we don't say, in many congregations, don't say Sim Shalom and Birkat Kohanim in the Musaf of Shemini Atzeret, because, or not Shemini Atzeret, Simchat Torah, Shemini Atzeret Eretz Yisrael. So the Simchat Torah, and the reason is because it has somehow become customary for people, for some reason, to drink, and perhaps the Kohanim will be drunk, and they should not perform even the simple task of Birkat Kohanim, which a lot of people have already memorized. The Kohanim should not perform that when they have imbibed on alcoholic spirits. So that's sort of, at least according to many commentators, hints to perhaps Nadav and Avihu themselves were perhaps intoxicated when this began, when this particular incident happened. Maybe this in and of itself. One moment. Oh, trash system they got there. All right, so I have the door open in case anybody wants to join me live. If you're vaccinated, you are welcome. The Kohanim perhaps might have been drinking, and that's perhaps what this Eish Zara was. This foreign fire was the drunkenness with which they performed their avoda. Now, so that's one opinion anyway. And finally, the end of the parsha, very, very important for people in my field. The end of the parsha, Parsha Shemini, and much of Parsha Re'eh, talk about the laws of kashrut, the laws of kosher animals, how to determine which animal is kosher or not, and why, etc., etc. Unfortunately, if you see the last Rashi in Shemini, and I say somewhat unfortunately, there's a career for people like me or mashgichim because of these laws. I say it's unfortunate because, as Rashi makes it very clear, this is an obligation on everybody. Everybody has to know the sometimes intricate details of kashrut. We'll learn that in greater detail when we go into a deep dive. So, with no further ado, I'm going to share the learning packet that I sent out. Actually, I believe I sent out the wrong one. I might have sent out last week's. So if that's the case, I apologize. But it should read 5781, which is the year, 0303, which is the third book of the Torah, Vayikra, third Parsha, Shemini. Ironically, Shemini is the eighth, but it's the third Parsha. Okay, thank you for confusing us. So with the Parsha begins in chapter 9, and we're going to go into a deep dive, chapter 9, verse 3, Leviticus 9:3, Vayikra Tet Gimel. Pasuk says, "El bnei Yisrael tadaber." You're going to speak to the Jewish people. Laymor, saying this: "Husir izim lechatat ve'egel ve'cheves bnei shanat mimim le'olah." This is part of the inauguration, and one of the commands that the Jewish people had was that they had to take a male goat, sir izim, for a sin offering, the egel v'cheves, and a calf and a lamb within their first year, 1-year-old calf and lamb. T'mimim, they had to be pure as usual, without any kind of blemish. We talked about that in previous classes, and this was going to be Olah, a different kind of sacrifice, not a chatat, not a sin offering, as the Seir Izim is, which was a sin offering. This is a separate, this is indeed an Olah, an elevation offering. Interestingly enough, if you allow me, I guess you can't stop me. I'm going to just a bit of a tangent here, where Rav Hirsch points out very often these korbanot are translated in funny ways. One of the funny ways is that an Olah is translated as an upward, a sacrifice that goes completely up, burnt up offering is how it's usually translated. And Rav Hirsch says that's not all it is. It's called an Olah because of what it does for the person. All of the korbanot talk about what they do for the person. A chatat takes care of chet, of sin. A shlamim creates peace. So that's why it's called a shlamim, a peace offering. So an Olah creates an aliyah. It creates an upward spiritual feeling for the person who brings it. So aside from that, let's see what now the question is from the Kli Yakar is, why did Aharon, so this is, he has to bring these things, why does he bring a sin offering, whereas the nation, besides the sin offering, also brings an Olah, an elevation offering? Seemingly a very detailed sort of question, but I think we'll learn a very important insight in this, which will hopefully get us into the class. It's a long piece from the Kli Yakar. I have it here in the source sheet if you want to look it up. Again, Young Israel, San Diego, 5781-0303. But let me tell you basically what he says. He says, Aharon brought a sin offering because he did something. Sin offerings help with a maaseh, an action. Aaron performed an action. He didn't want to worship the golden calf. I should back up a bit just in case you haven't been with us for a few weeks. Many of the things that the Kohanim and especially Aaron had to do during the inauguration of the Kohanim has to do with forgiveness or expiation for the sin of the golden calf that Aaron was involved with, or in which he was involved. Either way, Aaron was involved, and so therefore he has to do something. But Aaron was not involved in feeling. In other words, he didn't want to do this. He was compelled to do it. He was forced to do it by the Jewish people who basically threatened his life. They killed, according to the Midrash, they killed Hur, that protested. Aaron saw this and didn't want them to sin any further by killing him. And so he said, "Okay, I'll do what you want. Tomorrow, let's have this party. Just bring me this gold from the women who he thought would be able to protest and keep the men from doing this sin." But as the pasuk makes clear, the men ripped the earrings right out of the women's ears, brought it to Aaron, and he had no choice but to throw it into the fire. And he wasn't expecting anything to happen. And then an egel, a seemingly walking, moving cow made of gold, came out of the fire, out of the kiln. So obviously, this was a miraculous event, according to the way the Midrash describes it. But it had nothing. It had very little to do with Aaron's feelings. It had everything to do with his actions. And that a chatat, says the Kli Yakar, a chatat can forgive you for your actions. The Jewish people didn't really perform an action, aside from getting the gold and giving it to Aaron. They didn't actually put the gold into the kiln. That was Aaron's doing. The Jewish people needed forgiveness for their feelings, for their thoughts, not for their ma'aseh, for the actual kavanah, for the intent that they had. And what was their intent? Their intent was to have. Okay, we had this in Kitisa when we talked about this in greater detail. But if definitely some people, the Eruv Rav certainly, seem to want to worship another god. If that was the case, that wanting, that desire, it was wrong, and that needs forgiveness. And the way to get forgiveness for a wrong feeling is to elevate your feelings, to give an Olah, to bring up your feelings, to become more spiritually minded, not just spiritual like spirituality, but spiritually minded. In other words, focusing your actions on what Hashem wants.
So he's recording this.
Yes, recording this right now. Yes, so so that's the idea, that indeed the Jewish people needed to improve their feelings, whereas or elevate their feelings. They needed to bring an Olah, whereas Aaron had to get forgiveness for his action, so he needed to bring a chatat. That's the Kli Yakar in short. If you want to look at it in greater detail, very beautiful language, and where he explains these concepts and how these carbonot work, it's very much worthwhile to look at the source sheet. All right, we're going to skip a few psukim to chapter 9, verse 7, Tet Zayin, not Tet Zayin, Perek Tet, Pasuk Zayin in Vayikra. We're still in the first Aliyah. This is when Moshe is speaking to Aaron directly. It says, "Vayomer Moshe el Aaron, Krav el hamizbeach." Go close to the mizbeach, he tells Aaron. "V'aseh et hatatcha." Do your sin offering. Ve'et olatecha, and your elevation offering. V'chaper b'adcha b'ad ha'am. So get forgiveness for yourself and for the nation. Actually, these comments you're going to see are actually probably should have been reversed. Okay, let's Let's play it as it lays. V'aseh et karban, perform the sacrifice, ha'am v'chaper ba'adam, asher tzivah Hashem, and then get forgiveness for the Jewish people, just as Hashem commanded. Beautiful, beautiful. That's so Moshe tells him to do what we just said he was supposed to do. So far, so good. So let's see what the Gemara says. The Gemara in Shabbat, towards the end there, Kuf Mem Tet Amud Bet, so 149b, brings an interesting concept that's worthy for us to know. And this is for those of you who were in shul for Gedaliah's class a few nights ago, the first nights of Pesach. He talked about the idea of being a shliach, being a messenger for somebody or an extension of somebody in order to sin. Let's say somebody pays you to do something wrong. You're a hired gun, okay? And somebody pays you to kill somebody, God forbid. So if you do it, if you perform the action and you kill somebody, the Torah makes you obligated. You did the action. The person who paid you to do it, even though they're paying you, they're not guilty of the sin. They didn't do it. You did. It's not exactly how American law works, but nevertheless, that is one of the differences between American law and Jewish law. And so Gedaliah talked about that in some detail, why that's the logic, and if that's the logic, etc., etc. The Gemara, however, says elsewhere. He didn't speak about this. Amar Rabbi Yaakov Brei Devat Yaakov, Yaakov, the son of the daughter of Yaakov. So his maternal grandfather's name was also Yaakov, and for some reason he's named after his mother and not his father. Perhaps we'll see why at some point when we're learning in Yaakov, as we're going to start this Shabbat in the afternoon. The stories from the Gemara, open for all men and women to come and learn our first summer class. Okay. Kol shechaveru ne'enash al yado ein machnisim oto machziso shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Anyone who causes somebody else to sin is going to deserves punishment from Hashem. And he goes into a proof. There's a pasuk, etc., etc. And the point is, the Meshech Chachma uses that as a concept here. Let me try to find it. It's here. It is. Good. Bifrat ki amu b'Shabbat kol mi shechaver nas al yado ein machnisin oto machzito shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, just like we just said. That Gemara, person who compels somebody else to sin gets punished because that person is responsible. Gam kan, here also, Aharon nanash al yadam b'mitat Nadav and Avihu. Aharon is somewhat responsible for the death of Nadav and Avihu because he sinned with the golden calf. And in a sense, their deaths are sort of a punishment to him for that. Now, before you ask me, and this is a good question, don't get me wrong, how can you punish somebody for somebody else's sin? There are a number of answers to that question. I don't know if any of them will be satisfactory to you right now, but Hashem does that. That is something Hashem will do. He will punish a child for the father's sins if the child is young enough. In this case, Nadav and Avihu seem to have not been young enough. They were performing the avodah, so they must have been over the age of 13 for sure, 20 most likely. And the answer to that question is the correct the answer that I shouldn't say it's the answer I like. The answer that makes most sense to me is that That's not the only reason they died. As we see, there's so many commentaries about what it is that they did wrong. Whatever they did wrong, in conjunction with the fact that their father needed to be punished, in conjunction with many other factors that we might not even know, they died. It was their time. Hashem judged that it was their time for a number of reasons. Not all of them do we need to be privy to. But one of them is that Aharon sinned. So the Meshech Chochmah is saying that because he was involved somewhat in the sin, therefore he was culpable. But more than that, it also forgives the people. His inauguration offerings were meant to atone for his part in the golden calf. He was also atoning for the nation because the people insisted that he do what he did. They compelled him. And if somebody compels someone else to sin, they also get punished. The nation got punished. And so even though Aharon deserved maybe the bulk of the punishment for the golden calf, in some sense, even though, as we said before, he didn't really want to do it, he was compelled to do it. Nevertheless, he did it. And so he deserves some sort of punishment. He lost his sons. That's quite a punishment. But the people also lost his sons. The people would have gained more from them. And they are now dead. They're now gone. And it's a kapara also for them. They needed it just as much as he did. They needed their Olah, just like Aharon needed his katat. We're going to skip a few more psukim to the first pasuk in the next chapter. Interestingly enough, I didn't want to go on a whole rant about this, but I must have mentioned before that the chapter numbers in the Torah are not of Jewish origin. They come from monks writing in their in their monasteries. They wrote by hand copies of the Bible, and so in order to keep things organized, they created a chapter system. The Torah does not have chapters. You could say it has parshiot, which are subjects. You can say it has sedrot, so which are actually how we split it up to read on a weekly basis. But there are really no chapters in the Torah. We adopted, or some Jews adopted the chapter system just to make learning easier. It is in fact a convenient system. But there are sometimes, by the way, some people did not accept it. You'll find many classic works of even contemporary works of Judaism that don't give a pasuk, a chapter and verse number. They'll say Parshat Shemini Sheni Yud, which means the 10th verse in Shemini in the book of Vayikra. And so that's one way that people get around the difficulties of organizing a chapter system. But many people, as you can see, Safaria and I and many others, Art Scroll, many people have adopted or adapted to the system that the monks made up of chapters, and they are very convenient. Every once in a while, though, they're very wrong. So, for example, chapter 10 of Leviticus seems to be about the story of Nadav and Avihu and how they died. The very first verse talks about exactly how they died, and we'll talk, or what they did wrong anyway. And the next few verses talk about the consequences, and of course, Aaron's mourning, etc. But chapter 9, the last verse in chapter 9, I think it's verse Chaf Gimel, in the 23, I think, not totally sure anymore. That talks about how a fire went out and covered the Mizbeach right before Nadav and Avihu went there. And the fact that they went there and then got burned by the same fire is important, and Rav Hirsch focuses on that. But I guess the monks didn't think it was that important, so they didn't have that as part of the same chapter. So really, this is the second verse that deals with the incident. So it should be chapter 10, verse 2, right? But it's actually chapter 10, verse 1, because the monks have the previous, the beginning of the fire and the end of chapter 9. All right. Like I said, I didn't want to go into much of a rant, but it's worthwhile to know some of the historical context here of how the Torah is what we have now. Of course, the Torah itself never changed, but the additions of chapters and periods and commas, semicolons, the two dots, as they say in yeshiva. So all of that are additions that might make things easier, but are sometimes cause for confusion. Okay. Now, V'yichu b'nei Aharon Nadav and Avihu ish machtato. The sons of Aharon, Nadav and Avihu, took each man his own fire pan, v'yinu b'hem ish, and put fire in it, v'yasimu Olah ketoret, and they put ketoret in it, which seems to have been the wrong thing to do, as we'll see. V'yikruvu l'fnei Hashem, and they brought before Hashem ish zara. They brought a foreign fire to Hashem, asher lo tziva utam, that Hashem did not command them. And so the famous question is, and we're going to look at two possibilities here, very, very closely related, even though they come from very, very different sources. Famous question is, why are they killed? Let's look first at the Chiddushei Harim, our first source here. So he quotes the pasuk. Herush, he explains, Ki kol mitzvah tzrichim anu la'asot b'cheshek rav. We should do every mitzvah that we're commanded with a great desire. U'b'tzimon gadol ad she'b'sasiyat mitzvah yeh b'li hashrat chiyut hagashmit. There should be no physical pleasure that we're getting from doing the mitzvah. We should do the mitzvah purely for Hashem's sake, etc. The mitzvah itself should give you life. The mitzvah would give you life. Live with them. There was no command from Hashem to do this. They did it risking their lives, but not with any kind of command from Hashem. And then, therefore, it didn't have any life in it. A mitzvah, from the word tzava, from the word tzav, from the word command, a mitzvah has to be commanded. A mitzvah will give you life, but only if you're doing it the way you're supposed to do it. If you're doing something that you've commanded yourself, that's not a mitzvah anymore. There's no life in it. And so therefore, their souls had to leave, says the Chiddushei Harim. The best of intentions that they might have had, they wanted to do this, b'mesirat nefesh, they're willing to risk their life. Very nice. You risk your life to do something, you die. All right? You risk your life to jump off a bridge and see what happens. Things will end as expected. All right? There's no such thing as we don't risk our life for nothing. Only if it's a command to do so, which is rare. On that subject, Samson Raphael Hirsch, he goes into quite a lot of detail, as usual, as is expected of him, talking about how the words in the pasuk themselves teach you what Nadav and Avihu did wrong. So first of all, the pasuk, let's look at the pasuk, right? It called them immediately, V'yichu b'nei Aharon Nadav and Avihu. It didn't say V'yichu Nadav and Avihu, giving them some sort of personality as Nadav and Avihu first. It says B'nei Aharon, as if that's very important. Says Rav Hirsch, they were Bnei Aharon, yet they did not consult with their father before acting. They're Bnei Aharon? They're Banim. They're children of Aharon. They want to do something? Great. They're inspired to do it? Wonderful. Should they do it? Ask a gadol first. Ask your father. Ask a rabbi. Don't just wing it. Judaism isn't about winging it. Or precisely because, he continues, or precisely because they were sons of Aaron, they felt they were under no obligation to seek advice from anyone else. Actually, they were Nadav and Avihu. The next verse, the next part of the verse. They were Bnei Aaron and they were Nadav and Avihu. They were merely individual members of the nation, and yet they did not seek advice from the nation's leaders. Perhaps they had an exaggerated sense of self-worth, and so relied exclusively on their own reasoning. Moreover, the next part of the verse says, Ish machtato, each took their own fire pan. Each of them acted solely on his own initiative. They did not consult even with one another. Nadav didn't ask Avihu, hey, what you doing over there? Nadav went on his own and put fire in his fire pan. Avihu did the exact same thing. He put fire in his fire pan without even asking each other. It wasn't a plan. They didn't consult Aaron. They didn't consider themselves individuals like they should have. And worst of all, they didn't consult even one another. I don't know if it's worst of all. Make sure their intention was praiseworthy. Or even after this, they are called krovai, those who are close to me, is how that's translated. That's in the next verse that we're going to be looking at. Their praiseworthy intention is expressed in Torah Kohanim, the Midrash, as the fact is, however, Kevin Sharui Eish Chadasha, they're so great, they deserved a special fire. They died from a special fire. They died, it wasn't a regular death, it wasn't a regular basic death. It was a unique death. It was something special. The fact is, however, that when the entire nation was privileged to witness a revelation of God's closeness, Nadav and Avihu felt the need to make a separate offering of their own. Remember, the fire was seen by all of the Jewish people. They all saw Hashem's glory, whatever that means. At that point, Nadav and Avihu say, we're even a little bit better. This shows that they were not moved by the true spirit of priesthood. For in Judaism, there's a very important point he repeats in many of his comments. In Judaism, priests are completely identified with the nation. They have no standing in their own right. The whole essence of the Kohanim is that they stand in the midst of the people, and this accounts for their standing before God. Nadav and Avihu didn't feel that way, and that's what they did wrong. So that brings up a very important question. If that's what they did wrong, so how is Aaron comforted that it seems that as he was, as we see in the next pasuk? We're going to skip to 2 psukim to chapter 10, verse 3. This is what Hashem said. Bikrovai ekadesh. I will become holy. My name will become great or be well publicized by the ones who are closest to me. My glory will be seen through the whole nation. The Yidom Aharon. One of the most important lessons, I would say, in the entire Torah. The Yidom Aharon, and Aharon was silent. How many times was your mistake just not being silent when you could have been silent? You're rushing to work after shul. Somebody says something controversial. You decide to engage in conversation, and next thing you know, you haven't proven anything. You're still fighting about whether it's okay or not to wear a mask, and you're 30 minutes late to work, and all because you couldn't be Yidom Aharon. You couldn't stay quiet. It's a lot deeper here because Aharon had what to say. As we'll see soon. But yeah. No. Sorry about that. Yeah, so the Oznaim Torah wants to understand what exactly was it that Aharon felt would so comforted that he didn't need to express himself. He stayed silent. So Aaron was told that the purpose of his two sons dying in front of Hashem was to sanctify the tabernacle and to instill fear in the Kohanim so that they would not approach Hashem lightheadedly. The phrase, I will be sanctified through those who are nearest me, thus has a double meaning. He will be sanctified through those who are nearest him and among those who are nearest him, namely the Kohanim who serve in the temple. That's what really not satisfied, but that's what really quieted Aaron's sadness, in a sense, is this double meaning of what does it mean that they were krovai, that they're those who are close to me. Hashem is going to be made holy by those who are close to him. It means two things: those who are nearest him, in other words, the Kohanim, those people who want to grow and be closer to Hashem, and number two, among those who are the other way around, not the Kohanim in the first one. It's the double meaning. The double meaning is so interjoined for me that it's basically one meaning. Krovai, those who are close to me. What does that mean? So it's through them and among them. So through them it means through the Kohanim, not the Kohanim, through those people who are getting closer to Hashem, and among them means among the Kohanim who are priests who are doing the service for Hashem. When he heard this, a question arose in Aaron's heart. Did I need to be warned about this again after the warning given at Mount Sinai? Also, the Kohanim who approach Hashem shall sanctify themselves lest Hashem strike them. 1922 in Shemot. Even my sons, whose descendants are destined to be known for their alacrity in performing mitzvot, would not have needed so severe a warning. The burning to death of two souls in a holy place, such an honor and exalted day. But then he heard the end of Moshe's words. Thus I will be honored before the entire people. The purpose was that the entire people should fear the deeds of Hashem, for God is awesome for your temple. Also, Tehillim. They would be afraid to go near the holy place in a state of ritual contamination, or to eat holy food when their body or the food was ritually contaminated. In other words, what comforted Aaron was the fact that this serves a purpose. This is a warning to all Jews for all time to be more careful and to not mess around with things that we don't completely understand. It's comforting to know that that when a bad thing happens, that if there is any good that comes out of it, there's some comfort there. Let's go on. We have quite a bit more to do. Later on, the Kohanim, who, as I said before, were in a state of aninut, they were in a state of mourning that basically prohibits them from doing certain things as Kohanim. They still perform the services, but they don't necessarily eat from the korbanot, from the sacrifices. But there were a total of 3 sacrifices that were given that day. Rashi goes into it, that were given that day, that at least one of which they should have eaten. And when they do, and Moshe did not know that or forgot that, we'll see in a moment, he yells at the Kohanim for doing this, to Aaron's remaining sons. And Aaron defends them, and then the pasuk continues, "V'yishma Moshe v'itav be'inav." Moshe heard, and it was good in his ears. He approved. Why was he satisfied with that? What exactly? What's so satisfactory about that? Oh boy, it's gonna be hard to read. Sorry about that. Can I make that bigger? Oh, no. Oh wow, that's amazing. Okay. Okay. So we're going to quote now from Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, the famous Mishgiach of the Mir Yeshiva, from about 80 years ago or so. I think he said this in the 1960s. 60 years ago, I know. So he quotes from the Gemara in Zvachim, Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph. So in Zvachim it says, "V'yishma Moshe." I'm here at the where the pointer is here. "V'yishma Moshe v'yitav be'inav." Moshe heard and it was good in his eyes. Chazal, it says according to Chazal, Hodav v'lo bosh. He agreed and he was not embarrassed, Lomar, to say Lo Shamati, that I didn't hear this. Amar Shamati, he said I heard it and didn't forget, and forgot about it. So it says in the Gemara basically that Moshe knew that law before, but he had forgotten it, and this reminder is what he was happy about. Oh, good! I'm glad you reminded me. The Gemara says this, and the Midrash, as Rav Shmulevitz continues, the Midrash and others explain that actually he publicized this. He went all over the camp saying, "Yeah, there was this halacha, and I didn't know it, and I forgot it." And the Kohanim are correct in what they're doing. What did he forget? Masha, Masha Shavach Hu Moshe. Why is this such a praise to Moshe Rabbeinu, Olav Shalom? That he said the truth. He's a man of truth. He always says the truth. What's the big deal that he told the truth, that he forgot. It's not, he didn't lie and say that he never heard it. What's the big deal? What's the difference, really? That no falsehood left his mouth. Mikan hakusha gadol hoda al ha'emet. This is how important it is to hold on to the truth. Al sheshvach hu afilu al Moshe ish Elokim. This is even a praise to Moshe, the man of God. So what he continues and says is this. We have to understand what the context was of this historical event. Moshe had just given the Jewish people the Torah. Less than a year ago, the Jewish people received the Torah. And they got it from Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe could have justified a lie at this point, because he doesn't want people to lose faith in him, thus losing faith in the entire Torah, right? There's a lot of pressure on Moshe at this point to lie. You ever been in that situation? There's good reason to lie. The Torah even allows a white lie every once in a while for peace or whatever. Even Hashem, quote unquote, tells Avraham Avinu about Sarah laughing at him in a different way to make him feel a little bit better about himself, right? For Shalom Bayit, we're allowed to lie. For other reasons even, perhaps, we're allowed to lie. Why here, if Moshe was justified in lying, here he's praised for not lying? It's perfectly possible for him to say, I didn't see it. I never saw this halacha. This is a new halacha. He does that later on. There are new halachot that came about in the desert, like with the daughters of Tzlavchad. He could have said the same thing here, but he doesn't. He's a man of truth. And he was happy. There's a chance, because there was a chance, a small itty-bitty chance, according to Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, that if Moshe would have lied here, it would not be 100% because it was for the sake of Hashem. There's a small, little bitty bit that's for the sake of his own ego. 1 second. Back. 1 second. Something tells me I'm not being joined here today in person. One little tiny bit of ego in this mix of a lie, and then it's not worth lying. It's not worth it for Moshe Rabbeinu to lie, because then he'd be lying for his own self-glorification, for his own purposes. And his decision, says Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, he says this in two separate sichot, in Sichot Musar. His decision sent a message to all future leaders of the Jewish people to always be aware of any inkling of personal motivation before you do something in the name of God, before you say Lashon Hara in the name of God, before you decide to make a big decision for the community, to give money or to withhold money or whatever, because you think something's not religious enough. And I want to be on God's side in this one. Think very carefully about whether you're doing this really for Hashem or whether you're doing it for yourself. Moshe thought about it, took him a split second, and he agreed. He was happy that he decided not to lie, because that lie would have been a little bit for himself. That's the kind of great leaders that we had with Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, the rest of tonight's class, if you don't mind, will be about kashrut. A very important topic for me, as you know. I am often a mashgiach, and it should be an important concept for all of us, I imagine.
I think I'm going to be scared afterward.
Don't be scared. I don't think I'm going to teach you anything you don't already know. But I might have mentioned in previous classes, I am working on a book. The basic concept is lessons about kashrut and lessons about food and all kinds of and health and things like that from the Torah based on each parsha. So there's lessons in every parsha. But when it gets to a parsha like Shemini or Re'eh, which is literally has a whole chapter on kosher animals and such, obviously the book gets overwhelming. I would like to talk a little bit about start off with something deep. Let's talk about why there's kashrut. Now let's back up a bit. Kashrut is a chok, which is usually translated as a law that has no obvious logical reason. That's not necessarily what a chok is. There could be a number of logical reasons. What should not be done with a chok, however, nobody should assign one reason for it. Okay, so if honoring parents, I think that's the example I've used in the past for this. Honoring parents isn't just because we owe them gratitude for their great parenting, because unfortunately not everybody was a great parent, and we still not everybody provided for their children. Some people gave birth against their will, and we still have the mitzvot of kibbud av va'em. So it's not about that. We can't assign a reason for a mitzvah. But here we're going to try to give a few reasons. One, by the way, is definitely wrong, as you'll see in a moment. We're going to do something unique. Today we're going to quote a false source, as you'll see. And then we'll quote some emet, some truth. So chapter 11, verse 3 says, Kol mafreset parsa, any animal that has split hooves, v'shosa'at chesa, has a groove in its hoof, right? So it has hooves, and there's a break in those hooves. Malat gera, it chews its cud. Behema otato chela. If it's a behema, in other words, it's a domesticated animal. A domesticated animal, then you can eat it if it does these things. In other words, split hooves, chews its cud. Why is that? What is chewing cud? What is having a split hoof? What does that represent? So now I'm going to show you what it doesn't represent. This is from a non-Jewish book called Beef by Andrew Remus and DJ Frazier. And they have a page there trying to explain why Jews eat cow specifically. To the question whether pork could be added to eels, ostriches, otters, all of them banned from the Hebrew dinner plate by kosher strictures. but why not beefsteak? Why did the punctilious author of Leviticus give cows a clean billing and not scallops wrapped in bacon? So here's their explanation. This is completely not true. If you're tuning in late, this like War of the Worlds here. If you're tuning in late, let me make this clear. What I'm about to read is not true. I'll say this at the end also. To the Hebrews, unclean beasts were exceptions to nature, rebels against definition. Ostriches are birds, but they don't fly. Otters are mammals, but they swim. Eels are fish, but they have no scales. Pigs have hooves, but they don't chew the cud. These are animals that slip the bounds of category. They have made themselves exceptional, and as such are unclean and unwanted. Cows being shod with hooves and equipped with reticulorumen, in other words, they chew their own cud, conform to an established ideal. They are whole or complete, matching all the requirements of propriety. And in more than just a religious definition, cows were once the jack of all beasts, good for milking, eating, and pulling a plow. They turned useless scrubland into profit, taking nourishment from ground that would never countenance a weak stock. They were, in a biblical sense, clean. Okay. So much wrong with this, right?
I kind of liked it.
You kind of like it? Well, let me
Yeah.
ask you something. Do sheep pull a plow?
No.
No. Do chickens fly?
No.
They said the reason ostriches are not kosher is they're birds and they don't fly. Right here, right? Ostriches are birds, but they don't fly. They're an exception. The exceptions we don't eat. Do birds fly?
Most of
Let me
them.
break it down for you. Birds don't all fly. Chickens don't fly. That's not why ostriches are not kosher. That's not why chicken is kosher. It has nothing to do with whether they're exceptions to nature. Whatever the definition becomes of what's normal in nature. These guys decided on their own what's normal, and anything that doesn't fit is kosher or not kosher. That's not what the Torah does. Okay, that's not the reason for kosher. It's not even a reason for kosher. The Rambam in more in Nevuchim, he says one of the reasons for kosher has to do with the characteristics of the animals. That the Ramban sort of seems to agree that it has to do more with, sort of like you are what you eat, and most of the animals that we eat are docile, they're kind, they're gentle, they don't kill for food, right? Okay, so some do. We're not going to get into that right now, but the cow isn't the only animal that's the jack of all beasts that's good for milking, eating, and pulling the plow. So are sheep, except they didn't pull a plow, and that's not why cows were eaten. In fact, that would be a good reason not to eat a cow, because mules are also very good at pulling things, right? Oxen are kosher. We don't eat it very much. The food doesn't. Ox doesn't taste very good. Also, I guess a cow in a way. So it is also bovine, but nevertheless. All right. They continue with their point of how food nowadays isn't as healthy as it used to be, et cetera, and how cows are no longer pure like they used to be. Here's a real Kabbalist, though, telling you another reason for kosher. This is from Rav Moshe David Valle. I've quoted from him before, student / former teacher of the Ramchal. Oh, I see we're running out of time. I'm trying to hurry up here. I apologize. So basically, he says here that everything gets divine influence. Hashem created the world. He's divine. Spirituality sort of rains down like solar power from the sun. So, spiritual power rains down from Hashem all the time. For it to go through something, there needs to be an opening. There needs to be a pesach. There needs to be it needs to be open. Therefore, the hoof, which is the lowest part of the animal, so the part that's on the ground, needs to have an opening in it, needs to go through, needs to be a true cleft hoof in order for spirituality to go through it. Through it, not really into it. The cow doesn't become holy, but because spirituality goes through it, it becomes kosher for us to eat. I know this is deep and complicated, and if you're not Kabbalistically minded, you can just let that pass, like spirituality through the bottom of a cow's hoof. But that's kind of the idea, that all spiritual things need something, need the opportunity to go through it. The Chayot HaKodesh, these weird, not weird, these hard to explain spiritual level of angels called Chayot HaKodesh in Yechezkel's vision are called Kikaf Regel Egel. They had hooves like an egel, like a cow. Right? So for that same reason, they had split hooves. The divine influence enters into the lower world. The hooves of the spiritual chayot were split, allowing for that clear passage. Okay, so that's that. Let's go on to other things. Well, we only have a couple of minutes. Okay, maybe we'll do the last two things in a future year. Let's talk about this. We have time, and it's very important. chassida, so there's different kinds of animals and different translations for them. Safaria translates the chassida as a stork. Most people do, I think. Hanafa as a heron. The duchifat as a hopo, and the atalef as a bat. All of those are not kosher animals. The question that many people ask is, the stork, or whatever animal it is, it's called a chassida, from the shorish chesed, which seems to be a good thing. So why isn't it? The Gemara in Chulin, which Rashi quotes, says that it's called a chassida because Nikra Shema chassida she'osa chassidut im chaverotaha. It does kindness, it does chassidut, it gives chesed to its own community, to itself. So since it is generous with others, therefore it's called a chassida. Oops, 1 second. Where's that? Oops, I missed something. So the Chidushe Harim, I thought I had here. Weird. Oh, sorry. Chidush Harim elsewhere. Okay, I didn't put this in the sheet. The Chidush Harim explains, and I'm sure you've heard people say this before. I think Rabbi Hollander said this in previous years. Chidush Harim explains, yes, it does chesed for its friends, but only for its friends. When you're doing chesed only for your friends, that shows a callousness, because you're choosing. You know somebody else needs chesed, but you're not giving it to them. Why not? Because he's a stranger. I don't know him. I don't know her. That person's not important to me. It's not a member of my community. There's another community. Let them take care of it. Let France take care of the French Jews. Let the rabbis across the street deal with the Jews across the street. That's not how we roll. Every Jew is important. Every person's important. If you have a way to help somebody, it's a mitzvah to help, not just for your friends. So that's one problem with the chassida. The Tam V'dat says another reason. Beautiful answer, by the way. Also worth mentioning. You know why the chassida is not kosher? Because it does chesed on its own. It does chesed without the command. It does chesed because it's part of its nature. There's nothing kosher about that. There's no mitzvah in just being nice to people. It's random acts of chesed, these random acts of kindness on the bumper stickers. That's not a Jewish idea. Chesed is a mitzvah when it's commanded, as we saw before. just like the sons of Aharon, Nadav and Avihu, might have made a great korban, a great ketoret, fire on their fire pan. But if it's not commanded to them, it's not a mitzvah. It's not an anything. It's in fact, in that case, it was an avera, it deserved death. We have to be very careful that what we do is something concentrated. We do it for a reason. We do it with intent, with kavanah, with the desire to come close to Hashem, for all of our actions to be an Olah to Hashem and only good things. And I think we can end the class there. I'll stop the live feed and the recording and open it up to any questions we might have.
Amen. To what you said before.